I'm Janet Kappes. I live in Moorhead, and I have a passion for preparedness. It's always been one of my favorite things. My parents did lots of food storage, and I've been doing it my whole married life. So I'd like to share with you some of the things that I have learned over the years and ways to begin. During this time with the pandemic, it's been really difficult to get certain kinds of items, and for those who were not prepared, it's been probably a really difficult time. So we're hoping to encourage you to begin some on baby steps. And the first thing I'd like to do is tell you something that President Hinckley said to us. The best place to have some food set aside is within our homes. We can begin ever so modestly. We can begin with a 1 week supply of food and gradually build to a month, and then to 3 months. I fear that so many feel that a long-term food storage supply is so far beyond their reach that they make no effort at all. Begin in a small way and gradually build towards a reasonable objective. And President David H. Burton, who was the presiding bishop of the church, he said the storage program is within everyone's grasp. The first step is to begin. The second is to continue. It doesn't matter how fast we get there, so much as we begin and continue. And we do that according to our abilities. So the first thing I want you to do is to consider, how will you begin? The easiest way to begin is to start keeping a calendar of what your family is eating. So if you are keeping a calendar daily, by the time that you get through a month, you should have a pretty good idea of what your family is presently eating. And at that point, you can start looking and thinking, how can I add to that? How can I get a week's extra in my pantry? And so first of all, you'll look at your pantry and see what you have. If your family likes mac and cheese, then you'll want to have several boxes of mac and cheese. If your family happens to like chili and rice, then those would be things that you would want to acquire. The next thing is that you need to decide how you'll go about it. And the easiest way is to probably just each week in your grocery shopping, go ahead and buy a few extras. Buy something that adds to that meal. Another thing you might want to be doing right now is getting some local produce and canning, or maybe raising a garden. Another possibility would be that instead of eating out, that you take the money you would use for eating out and you put it in a jar and you save it to add to your food storage program. But whatever way you can do that, you've got to start acquiring a little at a time. It will become a habit. You'll be looking for those things that are going on sale. You'll be trying to pick up the good buys when you're at the grocery store, and when other items are available for you. We just were lucky enough to have someone offer tomatoes, and we've been busy canning tomatoes, and maybe you've been doing the same thing. But those all count towards that food storage. If you've made jam, then that's the sugar side of the food storage. So you want to prepare, and you want to do it gradually. You don't want to take out a whole lot of your money and just invest in one of those big programs that you probably won't eat, because right now we're looking for you to have a week's supply, then 2 weeks supply, then eventually a 3 month supply. And once you get to 3 months, then you will want to start working on a long-term supply, things that will last for a long time: wheat, rice, beans, those kinds of things that you don't have to rotate as often. I have right here that rotation is the key to a food storage program, and it is. When you buy cans of pork and beans, make sure that the new ones go to the back of the pantry and that the older ones come forward. When you pick up some soup, the same way. You want to make sure that your pantry's organized so that the newest things are at the back and the oldest ones come to the front, and you use them up. That way you eliminate waste, and waste is not what we want to have right now. Some of the more important things to consider is that water is the number one important item. If you look at these rules of threes, You can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, that's in really harsh conditions, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So of course, the first thing you want to get is water. And you can go and buy cases of water. That's an expensive way to have water. You can get containers and put water, or get the larger containers of water. You need 14 gallons of water for 2 weeks per person in your family. And that can be put into pop bottles, that can be put into empty juice bottles. They need to be washed out very carefully and thoroughly. They need to have a little bit of Clorox put in them and swished around, and then you can put in water that has been purified, that comes from your sinks. And if you're taking it from a well, then you need to put 2 drops of Clorox in every quart of water. So having Clorox on hand would be an important thing. Now remember that when we're having Clorox on hand to purify our water, we need to have regular Clorox, not the splashless or the ones with scents. Those do not help us at all. And Clorox does have a time limit. From the time that you buy it, it has about a 6-month storage limit, so it does need to be rotated along with everything else. You write on it as soon as you get your Clorox that you brought home, write on it the day you bought it, and 6 months from then you replace it with another bottle. So make sure that that's an important part. It's the most important thing you have is water. 14 gallons per person for a 2-week period of time. We also need salt. It's an absolute necessity. And we need 8 pounds of salt per person per year. So salt's a cheap thing to be able to acquire, and both of those are something that you could just immediately start on and not feel like you had to have extra money to go to the grocery store for those things. Then you start acquiring your food. You want to consider what your family likes and what they don't like. There is no use buying food that your family will not eat. My husband and I happen to like wieners and sauerkraut. Our children always called it sauerkraut, and they did not like it at all, so it would not have been a good source of food storage. And the idea that we would eat anything if we were hungry, they wouldn't. Their children will not eat anything if they're hungry. And so you need to be sure that you're buying foods that your family likes. The next thing is be aware of food allergies. Make sure that you're planning that there are foods for those who have allergies of different kinds, so that there are options for them too. Make sure you're planning foods that are for babies and for older people if they're in your family. Make sure you're thinking of your pets. They need to have something too. Calculate your family daily intake, including calories. The most important thing, excuse me, in an emergency is calories. And that doesn't mean that we want to fill ourselves full of candy bars, but we want to have things like peanut butter, and we want to have crackers and jelly and those kinds of things, because calories count. When you've got to do work and you're in a stress situation, you need things like that. I have plenty of jars in my pantry of chocolate chips, because I'm sure that in a bad situation I would want something with chocolate. If you would like something with chocolate, or if you need candy, make sure that candy's part of your storage. But 2 things that I want to remind you: do not put mint flavored, seasoned anythings in your storage, because that mint just permeates all of the storage. If you put something with a mint flavor in your 72-hour kit, everything will taste like mint. Another thing that we learned the hard way is that we thought, oh well, it would be a great thing to get some beef jerky. Beef jerky after a time molds, and it's a very expensive way to have to throw something away. So beef jerky may not be your best choice. The next thing is plan for a variety in your meals. Don't make sure that that there's not some variety, because most of us like to have something a little different. A lot of families may do the kind of meal planning where they have the same thing on Mondays, Taco Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. My husband came from such a family. They had basically the same thing. His mother was a working woman, and it made it possible for her to have an easy plan for their evening meals. My family, on the other hand, had great variety. My mother liked to cook a lot of kinds of things. So you need to know what your family's like. If you can get by with 7 meals each week, then that might be the easiest way to plan. But if not, then make sure you're planning for variety. The next thing is, don't put all your eggs in the same basket. That means you need to have a variety of things. You need to have some canned goods. You need to have some freeze-dried, some dehydrated, some fresh foods. You need to have things that you could put together, maybe baked goods, maybe to put together some brownies or cookies or something like that, so that there's some variety that way. You don't want to have everything home canned, because in an earthquake or some other kind of disaster, you could lose lots of that as the jars break. So you'd want to have canned goods, and you'd want to have other ways. Remember that if you have dehydrated or freeze-dried foods, you also need extra water, because they'll all require more water. And rotate, that's one of the most important things. Make sure that you, as you're buying, that you are rotating. The next thing is that you need to decide what kind of cook you are, what kind of cooking your family does. If for instance, you don't love cooking, then you'll probably want to look in terms of, especially long-term, some of those kinds of things that are just the chicken and Alfredo already together, or a lasagna mix, and maybe the bags of dried soups, or the bags of chili, those kinds of things. If you enjoy cooking, you're going to want to have your tomatoes and beans and the spices you need to make a pot of chili, and to put together a minestrone soup. So knowing how you like to cook is very important, because you're not going to change dramatically just because of a crisis. I think most people right now could see that with this pandemic, that most people, although they've tried doing new things, we've got lots of people who have apparently started deciding to make bread, but if that's not how you generally cook, it won't last too long before you will tire of that, and you'll want to have something that's kind of fast and ready. So be sure that you know that. MREs are available through some of the online, but they're very expensive, and so you will want to avoid those. I have a list that will be with this presentation of places that you could, in this area or online, order freeze-dried foods and dehydrated foods. So those will be available to you as you finish. All right, now let's talk water. There's lots of ways to store water. I've put out a few of those ideas. We have the regular bottled water that you can acquire, but you can go through that really quickly, because remember, there's not much in those bottles. You can use juice bottles. Clorox bottles work great. Do not use milk bottles. You never use a milk bottle, because first, they're very brittle. They don't seal tight. They also, you cannot get the milk solids completely out of those kinds of containers, so they are useless for storing water. They also, you have to be careful where you store water. Make sure that you don't put things clear to the top if it looks like it could freeze. In a container that's perhaps that you think you could put it. I made a mistake years ago and thought, well, we could store the water up in our attic. Well, no, when the water started dripping through in the middle of the winter, it was obvious we had problems, because almost every one of the containers had cracked and broken, and as it started to thaw, we had a wet ceiling. So don't make the same mistake I did. The church tells us that there are 3 main components to food storage. And they have a site that you can go to on Provident Living, and there's all kinds of information. They have little booklets that talk about a 3-month supply of drinking water, having a financial reserve, and then having a long-term supply. Here's my Clorox bottle. This is for, I have a dropper. You want to make sure you have a dropper that you put with your Clorox that you're going to keep with your water supply. And then you want to write on the bottle when you buy it. And so 6 months from that date, then you of course want to rotate it and put a new bottle again with, and if you're looking to try and decipher when it was made, I will put on with the rest of this information how you decipher these numbers that are on the bottle, because it's not the same as if you look at like a best buy date. We were fortunate some years ago, our ward was able to buy food grade 55-gallon containers that we could put water in. Now, if you're able to get a hold of such things, and you can do that through most of the food storage companies, but at a cost. You've got to also have, this is called a barrel buddy, and you have to have a food grade hose, and then you need a way to siphon the water out of these barrels. So it takes some doing, but I've got 55 gallons of water in each of these. I talked about the importance of having some kinds of snacks, some kinds of fun things. Popcorn's always a good choice. Chocolate chips could always be a good choice. The items that you might need to put together cookies or brownies or a cake, flour, sugar, canned milk. My husband loves cherry pie, so of course I keep plenty of cherry pie filling on hand. Oil is so important because you can cook about anything if you can fry it. Even things that are not particularly tasty or exciting can turn out better if they can be fried, so make sure you have that. Plenty of baking soda, baking powder. You can buy canned butter through a food storage program, so all of those things make fixing a little sweet treat a fun thing to do. All right, there are 7 major mistakes that we often make in food storage. We've talked about a few of those, that we don't have enough variety and that we have not planned for people's allergies or dislikes. We call something appetite fatigue, so we get tired of peanut butter and jelly for every lunch sandwich. Some things are just too harsh for children. You can't start with never having eaten whole grains and immediately make your whole diet full of those because they're too harsh for people's stomachs. We need to have extended staples, so we need to have a wide variety of foods, as we've talked about. We need to make sure that we have some vitamins, especially vitamin C. None of us want rickets or any of those dreaded diseases that our ancestors had to deal with, so we need those kind of things. And we need things that are quick and easy, because food psychologists tell us that, you know, if everything is an ordeal to try and get a meal on the table, then that really starts to wear on us, and some of you may have already experienced that. So we do need some quick, easy kinds of things, a can that you can just open and feed them, and I'll show you some examples in a few minutes. We need balance. We need to make sure that we have fruits and vegetables and proteins and carbs, and that there's a balance in our diets. Then we need to make sure that we remember that our containers need to be carefully thought through. If you have problems with rodents, or if you have, as we have heavy humidity here, we have to be careful about what we store things in. And again, rotation, rotation, rotation. So I've got in front of you a whole idea of a variety of things for freeze-dried and dehydrated foods. And these are the long-term kinds of things that you'll want to plan for once you get to your 3-month supply. I've got some, I'm gonna stand up here and see. I've got, this is one for one of those people who would like to just put some water with it and have a dish. This is rice and chicken. And there's Alfredo sauces, and this is Monterey Jack cheese. Here's instant potatoes. Here is cheese. This is a beef and stroganoff with noodles, so that you just add water and you can eat it right out of the packet. Those kinds of things are available at like Walmart. You can buy frozen or freeze-dried fruits. Here's berries and peaches. You can buy cauliflower, peas. I've got to see what I've got here, sitting here. Pork strips. This is scrambled eggs with bacon or ham. And then you can buy these kinds of containers. Now, because I'm old, this is the perfect container for me. But if you have arthritis, or if you think, well, I might one of these days become an old person like I never thought I would be, these containers that are 6-gallon buckets have what we call gamma lids. So it spins right off. I can empty my container, I can wash it out and fill it and spin it right back on. So instead of having those containers where you have to pry them off and break your fingers or maybe never get to your food, I think it would be awful to think that one of these days I die from hunger because I couldn't get into my food storage. So these are really handy. They are available locally. You can buy some at Lowe's. They're not a very good quality. Home Depots are rated much higher. Mine have come from a place called Emergency Essentials or BePrepared.com. And we have kept most of our wheat, rice, flour, sugar, those kinds of things in these containers. All right, now today I'm showing you a whole variety of possibilities for meals. I'm sure you'll have many more that you can add to it, but I went to my pantry and started looking and thinking, okay, if I were going to try and build my food storage program around 5 or 6 meals, here are some possibilities. So I pulled out pinto beans that are in a jar, and that's a juice jar that holds 3 gallons of pinto beans, or a can of pinto beans, and a can or a box of cornmeal muffins. So all of that would be a possibility for a meal. There's mac and cheese, tuna. Some of you might like something like that. My family likes rice and chili, and I've got, as I said again, there's bagged chili, there's canned chili, rice-a-roni, and some chicken, some canned chicken. Make sure that you're looking for canned kinds of meats, and make sure that you're looking at their expiration dates. Potatoes, they come in sliced and diced and whole. Roast beef and gravy. There's different kinds of soups that you might like to have for a meal, and if that's the case, crackers do not have a long shelf life, so you'd really have to work at like oyster crackers or saltines and making sure that you have those rotated. There's the possibility of pasta. Of course, there's lots of pasta sauces on the market. Make sure that your meals always have a vegetable or a fruit with them. I've got some tortilla ideas over here, just the Chef Boyardee raviolis and some green beans. Further down, there's scalloped potatoes and the little canned hams. All of these are shelf stable. Then you can see that I've also put out some breakfast ideas. Krusties, it makes 100 and some odd pancakes, and make sure you've got a big bunch of syrup or jam that will go with it. I happen to like cream of wheat and cream of rice. I think is always a good thing to have on hand, because if you've got a tummy or a child that has had some tummy problems, cream of rice is a good choice for them. There are a lot of people who like granola bars. I've put out powdered milk, cans of juice, bottles of juice. Tang is an excellent thing. It comes on sale at like Kroger every May and June for like 99 cents. So look for it because it's loaded with vitamin C. Peanut butter is a great thing to have on hand. It's not only high in calories and gives you lots of energy, but very easy to use and store. There are canned meats like Spam, different kinds of cheeses. Maybe you've canned your own jams and jellies, bags of soup, or the containers, those Bear Creek soups. So I'm hoping that this gives you a whole lot of ideas on what you might think to put together for a meal. Choose 6 or 7 and start duplicating those if you're that kind of a family, or choose 10 or 12 and duplicate those, but start somewhere. Start acquiring something. This is one of the things that I purchased several years ago to help store all of my freeze-dried cans. It holds like 140 of them, so it makes storage really easy. Of course, you just have to pull one out in the bottom and they roll down, and you can load them so it keeps them rotated. But this is a great choice, and sometimes they come on sale. There's a place called Shelf Reliance that I bought mine from, so that's a good choice. Here's a bucket that I have full of wheat that you might be able to see, that easy to get to, so that when I want to make sure that when you start thinking in terms of long term, that you're thinking in terms of, okay, if you are choosing wheat, that you're also choosing a hand grinder, because not always will you have electricity. Another thing I want to talk to you about is, how are you going to cook these things that you're storing? That's got to be something in your plan. Okay, I'm inviting you into my food storage room. I try and keep it really organized so it's easy for me to see what needs to be purchased and which things I have plenty of. As you can see, I have gamma lids for most of my big containers. And remember that I've been doing food storage for a lot of years. I started right after we were married, and we have kept it up ever since. So do not get discouraged if yours is just a small food storage. Everything counts, as our general authorities have told us. Now, one of the things you need to consider is that if you are working on food storage, you need to think in terms of, how will I cook these things? Because you might not always have gas or electricity. So if you have an outdoor grill, make sure that you keep plenty of propane. Perhaps you have a fireplace, and you can cook in a pot in your fireplace or over your fireplace, or maybe you have a outdoor type of fireplace that you could cook something that way. A fondue pot is a good way to heat soup. Having Dutch ovens and charcoal is another great way to be able to cook a meal. There are lots of kinds of products out there, again, in the food storage industry, that will help you be able to find a way to heat your foods. But know that most anything that's in here, whether it's chili or soup or whatever, can be eaten just out of the can. So be sure you do have a can opener, because although many are a hand can opener, a hand crank type, because many of the cans do not have the pop tops yet, and you'll need a way to get into your food. So make sure that you've prepared as far as some matches, if you've got to light a fire and cook something. If you decide that you've got to heat just a can of, say, chili over a fire, make sure you take off the paper so that you don't start a bigger fire and ruin your food. Be sure that you've kept things in as cool a place as possible. Anything under 70 degrees makes the shelf life longer. There's a whole list on providentliving.org from the church of things that have a 30-year shelf life. So when you get to long term, you'll know how long you can keep those kinds of items. Other than that, remember that the things that are stamped on our canned goods are best if used by, or best by, and those are to protect the industry and not because the food is no good. Canned food has a long shelf life, as long as it's not bulged, leaking, doesn't spurt when you open it, doesn't smell badly. You're going to be okay with things that are out of date. So we don't have to throw everything away. It used to be that every time that we passed those dates, we had to throw them away, but they are working on putting new dates on our cans. And so shop, have fun, talk with your family, get everybody involved, and good luck.